Photographs and journalistic photographs.
And I said principally, it's one, first of all, of economy. They're a different market, journalism and art. And that's something that I believe as a Marxist, and that's just honest as well. But also, they are trying to do different things. I'm not trying to convey information as much as I'm making beautiful images, as well as, I'm not conveying information, I'm conveying ideas, I think. And the idea has less to do with facts and more to do with an idea of agency and subjectivity, but also just about, they're portraits of people, most of them. And as portraits, I'm looking for a kind of beauty that's both in the image, and the tradition they're coming from is both painting and religious iconography, but also the beauty in their personality. So it's much more about the people than about the factual situation. And they're trying, it's basically they're trying to do something different. It's the intent. Although,
well, I think earlier we said that journalistic photographs from battle scenes or scenes of struggle have typical shots that journalists are encouraged to get because there's a pay grade around them. So the picture of the dead body, the picture of the malnourished child, the picture of a violent confrontation. These pictures are worth more money than a picture of someone smiling holding a gun. And that would be one difference. That's the difference of economy, and it's a difference of ideology. These pictures that you've taken of the New People's Army show smiling people. The tradition is portraiture, or even propaganda. I think of propaganda posters too.
yeah.
They're happy in the revolutionary struggle, so you're showing that, and you show where they are using, I think, an aesthetic language we associate with the pastoral. In other words, with people really in harmony with nature, because they are living in the jungle, and it looks like paradise.
And there is the idea of paradise is important because what I sensed there and what I was trying to capture there was freedom. You know, these people are operating outside of the laws of society and against the laws of society. They're operating for revolution, and for that reason, the United States and the EU has branded them terrorists. And also for that reason, these are not images that a journalist can get or would take or would publish in a Western or capitalist media outlet.
They have the wrong narrative.
They have the wrong narrative. They wouldn't be commissioned. They wouldn't. You wouldn't get them from journalism. You can't find these in journalism. And if you found the images I found of the NPA that were taken by photojournalists, they weren't happy. They weren't smiling. There was this other conflict. And also, I mean, I lived with them for a while before I started taking their pictures, so they're really people who I knew. And I took them spontaneously, so it wasn't like I was setting up a photo shoot. Some of them were, you know, we decided to do a portrait, but it wasn't, I went in for one day into the girly zone and came out in the evening. That's not how it happened. It was a real process of, they're also character studies, I think.
Can we go into the first room where we're going to show the video work? All that is solid melts into air. And Mark, this piece was made a few years ago, and I'll just set it up and you can talk about it. There's two opposing screens. On one screen there's a scene of mayhem at the Chicago Stock Exchange, and the other scene is scenes from the Congo.
The Niger Delta.
The Niger Delta, sorry. The Niger Delta, where Shell Oil and other oil companies are drilling for oil, and a group called
the Movement for the Emancipation of the Niger Delta
are fighting Shell Oil.
Yes, and the Nigerian government as well. The starting point was to talk about somehow visually the metaphysics of capitalism, to use real situations to show that we don't have, or capitalism produces a belief system that is not entirely factual or real or clear to anybody. And so I wanted to, on the one hand, show this Chicago Stock Exchange. I shot the footage on the futures and derivatives trading floor. And the futures and derivatives are these complicated financial products, which we now know caused the current collapse. And in fact, the day or the week I was filming, the day I started filming, was the first day of the collapse. It was the day that Bear Stearns collapsed, and that was the beginning of the credit crisis. That was just fortuitous. And on the other end, I was interested in the movement for the emancipation of the Niger Delta because they are also inspired by their traditional religions, which they believe make them bulletproof in their battles. But they also have this very clear and material understanding of what neocolonialism is. There are these corporations stealing the oil from under their feet, polluting the environment, and making it impossible to fish. They're traditionally fishermen, and basically starving them. So whatever we have in terms of a complex discourse of what's going on in the third world is actually very black and white to them. But I want to also make a film about oil, because oil is something that it's everywhere. All plastic is made from oil. Most electricity comes from oil. My camera is made from oil. The film is oil. Everything is oil, but we don't ever see it. We never see petroleum. And so in Chicago, petroleum is traded as a future, and it becomes digits on a screen or hand signals between traders. And in Nigeria, it disappears from under their feet. So it's about this kind of dematerialization. You do see some oil in Nigeria because they break into the pipelines to steal back their stolen oil, and then they sell it on the black market. That's the only economy that keeps them going. But that was the idea, is how to make visual something that disappears.
The Canadian dollar rises and falls with the price of oil.
Yes. Actually, their attacks can influence the stock market, the Dow Jones. If they attack an oil facility, then you actually see it in the global economy, which is amazing. And again, this is about agency. I mean, we think of ourselves as so much at the mercy of this inevitable apparatus of capitalism. But actually, when people decide to take action, and a band of a few people can actually make a difference. And in fact, the oil facility that's depicted on screen was attacked and destroyed on the opening weekend of this film when it opened in Amsterdam and Sydney. The few days before they had completed their mission. So,
could I ask you how you made the film? We don't see you in either film, but you're addressed. There's a moment in the African part of the piece where someone is talking to you, and that it seems like they're actually threatening you. Like, don't go any further.
Right.
This is it. And he's got a machete and he's beating it on his chest. It's a very tense moment. At least it seems like it would have been a tense moment, because you weren't with a film crew. It's you and the camera.
It's me. It's me and the camera and the people I met there, who became my friends and protectors. And yeah, I went there. I met people who could help me and put me in contact with the militants while I was living in England. And then when I went down there, I already had contacts. And when I went to the territories, I was well protected by the people I was filming. And I was a guest of one of the generals of the movement for the emancipation of the Niger Delta of MEND. There are 3 generals, and I think there are between 50 and 80,000 soldiers. So I was pretty high up, and so I was well protected. And everybody was extremely friendly. I have to say that Nigeria is a very theatrical culture, and I mean, people act differently when I turn the camera on them. So, you know, when I shut the camera off, they have a sweet and gentle voice, and when I turn the camera on, they speak in this kind of political soapbox kind of way. So there is this.
So they were using you to get a message across.
They were using me to get a message across, and there was also a performance as well as it. I mean, every documentary is also a performance, but they were participating in what they felt was, you know, the cinematic aspect of it. You know, the man who's beating his chest with the machete. You know, I was alone I was not alone. My 2. Minders were at either shoulder, so I wasn't actually fully scared. And I was also, I didn't know what he was saying because he was speaking in pidgin English, and it wasn't very clear to me what was happening. All I knew at the time was that it was a good shot, and so I just kind of was more thinking about holding the camera steady than I was about being attacked, and I had faith in my minders that they knew how to handle the situation. And I believed that he was addressing more the camera than me. And, you know, you don't see me in any of my films. I do subtract myself as much as possible. So I want to be kind of, it does 2 things. It puts the audience in my position, and it also kind of creates it creates a fiction. It creates my position by when the people address me or the way they talk to me, and also I feel like in some ways I'm using the situations I'm filming to express my own ideas, or, you know, I have ideas and then I go and find out in the world where they are instantiated. So in some ways they're all self-portraits. I mean, there is this kind of back and forth that is, whether it's a subjective or an objective position. And so, but I think that's mostly a narrative strategy as well. Because I don't want a voiceover telling the audience what they're looking at, or, I mean, it's mostly an aesthetic decision.
Can we talk about the first work, the one channel work?
Oh, okay, sure.
It's interesting. The show goes up from a 1-screen work to a 2-screen work to a 3-screen work. It's a nice geometric progression.
It's a dialogue.
So how do you see it between the works? Oh, it's pretty dark in here. I don't know what we're going to do.
No, we can't film in here.
Yeah.
Yeah, this first work is called The Word Was God. And it's in 2 parts. The half is I filmed with a hermit in the desert in the mountains in Syria who speaks Aramaic, which is the language that Jesus spoke. And then the second part I filmed with a Pentecostal congregation in London, in East London, who speak in tongues when they pray. And they're mostly Caribbean and African immigrants. And the idea was about the relationship between, again, metaphysics and language, and that ideas exist only in words, and so too does God. There's a philosophical idea that one philosopher, Lacan, a psychoanalyst, thought that all authority exists on the same level, the symbolic level, and that's God, the law, but the Father, and that all is communicated through linguistic structures, and you learn all that at the same time. Adoption of language comes at the same time as the Oedipus complex and things like this. And this is the idea I started with, is how, again, the question was, how do I use a real world situation? How can I use documentary images that I actually can take of existing things to express ideas that you can't see? And if the idea is God or Jesus or the Holy Spirit, how is that made manifest? And my previous film to this was about a woman who believes she gets stigmata and that miracles happen in her bedroom. And I had this idea of the miraculous as being somehow cinematic. And also this idea that, ideas are forced into the world through a miracle, and people kind of resist or overthrow the laws of nature and the laws of reason through faith to bring into the world something that is not true, or is not true according to reason and empiricism. And so the miracle of the Pentecostalists with the miracle of glossolalia was interesting to me. And then I was also at the same time interested in Aramaic, because this village I had known about since my earliest memories. My father is from Syria, and he would tell me about this village. It had some sort of storybook quality to it. And I was also interested in making films that had some sort of religious reference, but was still documentary. So it's about, it's materialist, but at the same time metaphysical. Mm-hmm. And so the hermit living in the desert is kind of a Christ figure. It's about sacrifice. He refers to his father, and then the congregation in London is about the Holy Spirit, and that's actually what the theology means. And then structurally, formally, the split is also between the first is an individual. It's a portrait. He talks. So it's a narrative. It's a kind of traditional first-person narrative, and the second is about a collective. And the structure is musical. The reference when I was editing was jazz music, because I condensed prayer meetings. I filmed a few prayer meetings. They all last 2 hours into 8 minutes, and laid the sound so that it sounded like music. And also, from what I understand, this is partially what jazz music comes from. For example, Charles Mingus has a song, Wednesday morning prayer meeting, or Wednesday night prayer meeting, and I was filming Wednesday morning prayer meetings, and the way that the parishioners position themselves independently and seem to chant and sing when they're praying, and do so in this kind of improvised way, but still within some sort of structure. It's musical, and that's what I was looking for as well. That's also, when I'm editing and when I'm structuring my films, that's an important reference, is how is music, like there's a rhythm to filmmaking as well. And since my films are art films, they're not journalistic documentaries in a similar way that we were talking about the photographs, but also there's no narrative, and in fact I subtract as much information as possible. It's not about the facts at all, it's about the situation. It then becomes an issue of how do you structure it, and one of the structures is musical, it's because of the rhythm happening through the sound, and the other reference is poetry. So poetry is also a distillation or a reduction or a subtraction, where everything, every element is more potent and meaningful, and that's how I treat the language of the films as well. That's how the discourse. That's the idea anyway.
That's beautifully said. Thank you. Can we talk about the work that's going to have 3 screens?
Yeah.
That will be shown for the first time anywhere.
Yeah, it's this is No Permanent Address is premiering here. It was commissioned by the Belkin Gallery. No Permanent Address is a play on words from the New People's Army. Their acronym is NPA, and they joke that it's no permanent address. They joke that because it's a guerrilla army and you have to move every day or two. So you camp you set up camp once, and you immediately have to change position. That's how guerrilla wars are fought. And the New People's Army is a group of Maoists. They're the armed wing of the Communist Party of the Philippines. They've been waging their Maoist revolution for 40 years. And they're now on the EU and US terrorist list. So this is also a film about terrorism in a way. They're not terrorists, or I don't believe they're terrorists, and it's hard to believe they're terrorists once you see the film. But the idea, the starting point was about the death of communism. And my educational background is in philosophy before I started making film, and filmmaking and philosophy are probably the 2 places where Marxism is most alive in this world. And my favorite writers are all Marxists, and there was a beautiful conference on the idea of communism 2 years ago in the University of London. And now, with the recent financial collapse and the credit crisis, people are questioning again the inevitability of capitalism. What seemed like a final triumph in 1989, now it doesn't seem so final. But what I was interested in is this, is taking this away from the world of philosophy and the academy, and seeing where does communism exist in the world, and not institutional communism, but revolutionary communism, and that in the Philippines they are as orthodox as it gets when it comes to their theory. They're
Maoists, aren't they?
They're Maoists. They're Marxist-Leninist Maoists. And so that was one point. But the other point was, why does communism continue to appeal to me and to my friends and colleagues who are, Marxist, socialists, or somehow leftists? What is the basis of that? And usually, or I think it's always an idea of love. Within Marxist theory, it's historical inevitability. There are all sorts of economic reasons why it's inevitable. But I think what inspires me and most of my friends is a real, not sympathy, but love for humanity, and it's about camaraderie. And so when I first heard about this group, it interested me because they had performed the first gay wedding in the Philippines, and that was about 5 years ago. And it really seemed quite vanguardist, this combination of taboo sexuality and egalitarian revolution. And so I also was aware that they had a lot of women in their numbers as fighters. And so I wanted to make something about the feminine side of the revolution. And also, to depart from all this all melts into air, which is quite aggressive, and almost everybody who appears in the film, certainly everybody who speaks in the film is a man. This is quite more balanced and is also about the women in the army. It's on 3 screens. The images usually syncopated. There's this kind of departure and convergence of rhythm and pace. So sometimes you'll have the same image in all 3 screens, and sometimes it will be a different image, or sometimes the same image slightly out of sync. So it produces this strange aesthetic of identity and repetition and difference at the same time. And also, I was again by myself. I wasn't alone. I mean, I was with these people, but I didn't have a crew, and it was trying to construct a fiction of being in one place but having one camera. So, for example, I'll have a scene, and it will be 3 different images from the same scene on the screen, and so you'll really feel like in some way you're between the people and among them. But it's a fiction of editing because, you know, I'm kind of taking 2 different shots from the same period and putting them at the same time. But the idea here, like also with all this all melts into air, is really a certain hyper-real aesthetic. I want to feel surrounded by the situation and actually inside of it. The screens are just over life size and almost on the ground and kind of fill your peripheral vision, so it really feels like you're standing in them. And that's one of the differences between installation and cinema, and also television, of course, is that the scale and the position of the screens and can really create a greater sense of realism, of hyper-realism. And you know, also it's quite surreal as well, especially all this solid melts into air. The difference between realism and surrealism is very slight. So there's this kind of, for me, having been both places and now seeing them installed, it's very strange because I feel it's a deja vu. I feel again there. And the idea is, for me, when I'm making them, is to give myself over in some way to the subjective position of the people I'm filming, to kind of abandon any pretense to objectivity and tell their story in some way, but also to force that position in the audience as well. That's part of it. You disagree?
No, it occurs to me that I'm sure that somebody will come to this show and say that, or ask why the Africans are portrayed as masculine and the Asians are portrayed as feminine. Doesn't this fall into Eurocentric cultural stereotypes?
The Asians are not portrayed as feminine. There are masculine men in the film as well. There are just women among them, and the women are, I mean, I would say that it's a question of what is, when I said feminine, I also meant the idea of love and homosexuality and feminist women. It was a matter as well of the situation of the particular people and what they gave me and who they were. I didn't. It was the machismo of the movement for the emancipation of the Niger Delta was in part because they're all men. There's one woman warrior among men, and I desperately wanted to talk to her, and she refused. But they were all men, and I didn't ask them to perform the voices with which they spoke. And the same in New People's Army. I was actually surprised at how sweet they were. And when I was filming them, I was afraid that it would come across as too sweet, and that there wouldn't be a palpable danger, because I'm filming a war movie and I have this preconceived notion of what communist revolution is like, and what it turns out to be are actually quite gentle people who live like a family and are quite loving towards each other. But it was not something that I intended. It did just come across. It was quite spontaneous. But no, I didn't really. I mean, when I went to Nigeria, I didn't think I was making a film about men. When I went to the Philippines, I did think I was making a film about women and gay men. It ended up being only half that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think we got a lot.